The church was silent except for the soft sobs of a few relatives, the scent of lilies hanging heavy in the air. Lila stood near the front, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, trying to keep her composure. Dad had always been the strong one, the steady hand guiding their little family, and now he was gone. Grief weighed on her chest, but she had learned long ago to hold it in, to keep her emotions from spilling over where others might exploit them. Marin, her younger sister by 2 years, stood a few steps away, leaning casually against the pew, her lips curved in a smirk that didn't belong in a place like this. Lila had known that smirk too well. It was the same one Marin had worn when she took the last piece of birthday cake as a child, or when she managed to charm their father into giving her privileges Lila had earned. Now it carried something sharper, crueler. "You really think Dad left you anything?" Marin's voice cut through the quiet, low but clear enough for Lila to hear. Her eyes were glinting with a mix of amusement and malice. "I mean, he always knew who was the smarter one. Don't get your hopes up." Lila's chest tightened, her fingers gripping the edge of her dress. She could feel the anger rising, but she swallowed it down. There was no reason to give Marin the satisfaction of a reaction. Not here, not now. She had learned patience over the years, the kind of patience that waited for the right moment to strike back, not with words, but with actions that couldn't be denied. The church doors creaked, and a hush fell over the gathered crowd. Sterling walked in. Lila hadn't noticed him arrive, and neither had Marin, apparently. He was tall, his presence commanding without needing to speak, his dark hair perfectly in place, eyes scanning the room with a quiet intensity. There was a shift in the air the moment he stepped in, a tension that tightened around Marin like a noose. Marin's smirk faltered, her eyes widening slightly as they met Sterling's. For the first time that day, the confident, untouchable mask she wore began to crack. Lila watched her sister's face drain, the arrogance slipping away in the blink of an eye. Sterling didn't say a word, but his look carried more weight than any argument could. It was enough to make Marin reconsider every cruel thing she had just said, to make her realize that the easy power she thought she held over Lila might no longer exist. Lila felt a surge of calm wash over her, an unspoken understanding passing between her and Sterling. She didn't need to explain, didn't need to justify. The tension in the room was tangible, almost electric, and every head turned subtly to notice the change. Marin, caught off guard and unprepared, was suddenly smaller, her bravado exposed as fragile and hollow. The service continued, but Lila no longer felt the same weight of dread pressing down on her. She could endure the whispers, the judgmental stares, even Marin's venomous comments, because she knew she wasn't alone. Sterling was there, steady and unwavering, and for the first time in years, Lila felt the quiet thrill of knowing the tables were beginning to turn. Marin, on the other hand, felt it too, the unmistakable shift in power, the recognition that Lila was no longer the one to be underestimated. And for that fleeting moment, Lila allowed herself a small, satisfied smile, knowing the first move had already been made. Lila could still remember the way their childhood home smelled of fresh paint and old wood, a comforting mix that now felt distant and bittersweet. She and Marin had grown up under the same roof, but it never felt equal. Marin had always been the one to get attention, the one Dad praised endlessly. Every good grade, every little achievement of Marin's was celebrated with laughter and pride. Lila, on the other hand, learned to fade into the background. Her accomplishments were quietly acknowledged, if at all, and she learned early on not to expect recognition. It wasn't that Lila didn't try. She was practical, determined, and independent. She worked hard at school, stayed up late on projects, and even took extra jobs as a teenager to save for college. But somehow, no matter how much effort she put in, it never seemed to matter as much as Marin's natural charm. Their father's eyes would light up when he saw Marin's art projects or heard about her debate victories, while Lila's work was noted politely and quickly forgotten. The rivalry started small, playful teasing, whispers in the hallway, but it grew sharper over the years. Lila remembered the day she learned that Marin had actively sabotaged one of her biggest opportunities. She had worked for months preparing her scholarship applications, perfecting essays, and gathering recommendations. She had been so proud of her work, sure that it would finally earn her the recognition she deserved. Marin, of course, knew. She had seen Lila's excitement, had watched her carefully craft every word. And instead of letting her sister succeed, Marin quietly intercepted one of the recommendation letters, hiding it so that it never reached the scholarship committee. When Lila received the rejection letter, she couldn't understand why she had failed. Marin acted innocent, offering a pitying smile and pretending to console her, all while hiding the truth she would only reveal years later. Mom had been gone for as long as Lila could remember, leaving her and Marin to navigate the world with only their father's guidance. Dad had always leaned toward Marin, perhaps because she reminded him of Mom, or maybe because she was simply easier to admire. Lila had accepted it, though it stung. She learned to rely on herself, to build her own strength quietly, even when no one else saw her efforts. That hidden sabotage planted a seed of bitterness in Lila, though she never let it show. She kept her anger private, letting it fuel her in subtle ways. Every late-night study session, every careful plan to get ahead, every quiet success was a small victory over the unfairness of her childhood. She learned to be patient, to wait for moments when the world, or at least her sister, would have to acknowledge her worth. Looking back now, Lila realized that those early betrayals shaped her into the woman she had become, resilient, cautious, and quietly determined. Marin had taken pride in undermining her, but each act of sabotage only strengthened Lila's resolve. She had learned the hard way that life wasn't fair, that recognition could be stolen, but nothing could take away the knowledge of her own capabilities. That knowledge, Lila understood, would be the foundation for the choices she made in the years to come. The church had grown quieter now, the ceremony moving toward its end, but the whispers among friends and relatives lingered in the air like smoke. Lila could feel the weight of their eyes, the subtle judgments, and she forced herself to stand tall. She had long since grown used to being underestimated, but today it felt sharper, more cutting. Marin leaned toward a group of distant cousins, her voice just low enough to be meant for Lila's ears. "Do you really think she's capable of handling Dad's estate?" she said, her tone dripping with doubt and amusement. "I mean, look at her. She's always been practical, yes, but can she really manage all of this?" Lila's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. She had learned that arguments with Marin rarely ended in fairness. Instead, she let the words hang in the air, biting at her silently. Every whisper, every doubt Marin cast, only strengthened the quiet resolve that had been building inside her for years. Sterling stood beside her, his presence calm but undeniably strong. He didn't speak, didn't need to. Just standing there, with that steady, measured gaze, he seemed to create a wall around Lila. Marin's sharp eyes flicked to him, and for the first time, Lila noticed a flicker of unease in her sister's expression. Sterling didn't have to say anything to make it clear that he wasn't someone to underestimate. The air between them felt charged, a quiet electricity that Lila had never noticed before. Relatives shifted uneasily, sensing the subtle tension. Sterling's quiet confidence contrasted sharply with Marin's forced bravado, and it was as though he alone had the power to expose her for the arrogance she had always relied on. Marin tried to regain control, her smirk returning, though it no longer reached her eyes. She leaned closer to the group of cousins again, lowering her voice but making sure Lila could hear. "I just hope she knows what she's getting into," she said, a hint of warning in her tone. "It's a lot more complicated than she thinks." Lila held her posture, her eyes forward, refusing to show the sting of the words. But inside, a plan was forming, shaped by years of careful observation and quiet determination. She had endured Marin's jabs before, but today, with Sterling by her side, she felt a subtle shift in the power dynamics. The sense of being alone, vulnerable, and dismissed was beginning to fade. Sterling's gaze didn't leave Marin, and Lila realized how much weight his silent presence carried. He was protective without overstepping, calm without being cold, and there was a hidden edge to him that made Marin hesitate. The audience in the room, relatives, friends, even herself, could sense the unspoken warning that Sterling conveyed simply by being there. For a moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Lila felt the thrill of knowing that the first cracks in Marin's confident front had begun. The whispers of doubt, the subtle intimidation, the quiet control Sterling displayed. It all set the stage for what was coming. And in that charged silence, Lila allowed herself a small, private satisfaction. For once, she didn't feel overshadowed, and she knew that Marin's arrogance was starting to meet its match. Lila had always been careful about keeping her life private. To everyone outside her small circle, she appeared quiet, practical, and content to live in the background. But behind closed doors, she had been building something remarkable, a real estate business that had quietly flourished over the years. She managed properties, negotiated deals, and turned neglected buildings into thriving investments, all without drawing attention. It was her secret strength, the foundation of her independence, and the proof that she didn't need anyone's approval to succeed. Maren, of course, had no idea. She still looked at Lila with the same patronizing smile, the same belief that her sister was fragile, dependent, and easy to dismiss. "She's always been the quiet one," Maren had said many times, her tone implying that quietness equaled weakness. She never stopped to consider the hours Lila spent learning contracts, the countless meetings she had led alone, or the financial risks she had taken and succeeded at. Sterling, however, seemed to understand. He didn't need to ask. He watched Lila with an expression that mixed admiration and caution. There was a subtle way he seemed to shield her without drawing attention, as if he knew both the world she had created for herself and the dangers lurking in Maren's arrogance. Occasionally, his eyes would flick toward Maren, and Lila could see the shadow of knowledge in them, a quiet warning that he was aware of the underhanded ways Maren had tried to undermine her in the past. Lila's mind had learned to anticipate betrayal. Years of being overshadowed and underestimated had honed her resilience. Every slight, every whispered doubt had been absorbed and transformed into quiet strength. While Maren thrived on attention and control, Lila had built power in silence. Her business was proof that she could stand on her own, make calculated moves, and succeed without needing to be praised or acknowledged. There was a thrill in knowing she had her own empire, one that Maren had no clue about. Every time Maren dismissed her, Lila felt a quiet satisfaction. She didn't need to argue or defend herself. The truth of her abilities would reveal itself in time, and it would speak louder than any insult Maren could throw. Sterling's presence made Lila feel even more grounded. He seemed to understand the depth of her patience and the sharpness of her mind. There was a subtle communication between them, unspoken but powerful, that strengthened her resolve. She knew he recognized her capability and was prepared to stand with her if the time came to confront Maren's arrogance directly. In that moment, Lila realized that the years of quiet endurance had prepared her for more than just surviving Maren's cruelty. They had prepared her to take control, to expose the truth, and to ensure that the sister who had once undermined her would finally recognize that Lila was not to be underestimated. It was more than revenge. It was justice shaped by patience, resilience, and strength. Every deal she had closed, every risk she had taken alone, was a step toward proving that she was more than Maren had ever imagined. And for the first time, Lila felt ready, not just to defend herself, but to quietly, decisively, claim the respect she had earned all along. Lila couldn't shake the unease she felt after overhearing a conversation between Maren and one of Dad's old friends. Maren had been talking in hushed tones about Dad's will, casually dropping hints that she planned to bend things in her favor. Lila's stomach tightened as the pieces fell into place. This wasn't just sibling rivalry anymore. It was greed, and Maren had no intention of hiding it. She shared the concern with Sterling later that evening, their conversation quiet and careful. Sterling listened intently, his eyes narrowing slightly as he considered the situation. "We need to be subtle," he said finally, his voice calm but firm. "She won't take a direct confrontation well, and we can't give her any room to cover her tracks." Lila nodded, feeling a mixture of determination and relief. Sterling's presence gave her confidence she hadn't realized she needed. They began to craft a plan, not one based on confrontation, but on exposure. They would let Maren reveal her own intentions, make her arrogance and greed impossible to deny. Sterling had skills that Lila had only recently come to appreciate fully. His background as a lawyer and a negotiator gave them an advantage that Maren couldn't anticipate. He understood how to ask questions that seemed casual but were precise, how to observe reactions and catch lies without anyone noticing. Lila felt a thrill at knowing they were using her sister's own confidence against her. Over the next few days, Lila and Sterling carefully gathered details. Sterling would casually bring up scenarios about the will when Maren was around, watching for slips. Lila paid attention to every word, every expression, every hesitation. It wasn't about confrontation. It was about letting Maren make the mistakes that would prove her intentions without them having to accuse her outright. Maren continued to behave as if she held all the power. She underestimated Lila's calmness, assuming her sister would panic or beg when faced with legal matters. But Lila had learned patience over a lifetime of being overlooked. She didn't need to rush or force anything. Her plan was to let Maren's own arrogance carry her toward exposure. Sterling guided her gently, pointing out opportunities to observe without seeming suspicious. He reminded her to stay calm, to watch Maren closely, and to resist the urge to act too soon. "The moment you react emotionally, she wins," he said. Lila agreed, suppressing the urge to confront Marin immediately. The tension between them was quiet but electric. Every casual remark, every pointed question from Sterling, was designed to test Marin's composure. And every time Marin faltered, even subtly, Lila felt a small spark of satisfaction. The first move had been made, and it was already working. Lila realized that the balance of power was shifting. Marin's overconfidence, her assumption that Lila was weak and dependent, was going to be her undoing. Sterling's skill, combined with Lila's patience and insight, meant they had the upper hand. The stage was set for Marin's downfall, and the first step had already been quietly executed, unnoticed by everyone except the two people who understood the game being played. Lila was going through Dad's old financial records late one night, trying to make sense of the estate and ensure nothing was hidden. She had already suspected Marin of manipulations regarding the will, but nothing could have prepared her for what she found. Buried in the account statements were withdrawals and transfers that didn't make sense, small amounts at first, then larger ones over the years. And the pattern was unmistakable. Marin had been taking money from Dad's accounts for years, quietly and deliberately. A wave of shock hit Lila. She sank into the chair, staring at the numbers, her mind racing. How could her sister betray their father like this? How could she think she could get away with it? Anger rose inside her, sharp and consuming, but beneath it was something stronger, a deep sense of betrayal. She had tolerated Marin's arrogance for years, had learned to ignore her jabs, but this was personal. Sterling, who had been reviewing some of the estate documents with her, noticed her sudden tension. "What is it?" he asked gently, moving closer. Lila hesitated, then showed him the records. Sterling's eyes scanned the details quickly, his expression darkening as he took in the evidence. "This isn't just carelessness," he said finally. "This is deliberate. She's been siphoning money for years." Lila's hands trembled slightly as the reality sank in. The sister who had always seemed so polished, so in control, had been hiding this theft for years. And their father, trusting and kind, had never suspected a thing. It made the betrayal sting even more. Sterling reached out, placing a steady hand on hers. "We need to be careful," he said. "Confronting her without a plan could backfire. But we now have the proof. We can take our time, let her make the next move. When she does, it will expose her completely." Lila took a deep breath, trying to calm the rush of emotions. She wanted to yell, to accuse, to demand justice immediately, but Sterling's calm presence reminded her that patience was stronger than anger. She realized that the best revenge wouldn't come from impulsive actions. It would come from strategy, from using Marin's arrogance and carelessness against her. The feeling of betrayal was heavy, but it also ignited a sense of purpose. Lila had been underestimated for her quiet strength her whole life, but now she held the proof that she was more capable than anyone had imagined. Marin's mistakes, her greed, and her assumption that Lila would never notice had all aligned to give Lila the advantage. That night, as Lila stared at the numbers again, she felt a mix of fury and focus. Sterling's quiet support, combined with the evidence in front of her, made her feel unstoppable. She didn't need to rush. She didn't need to act recklessly. Marin would reveal herself in time. And when she did, Lila would be ready. Every stolen dollar, every act of betrayal, would serve as a foundation for the reckoning that was coming. Lila clenched her fists, letting the intensity of the moment settle into quiet determination. The betrayal had been revealed, but the revenge was still to come. And this time, Lila would ensure it was flawless. The dining room was quiet except for the soft clatter of cutlery and murmurs of distant conversation. The family had gathered for a dinner that was supposed to be about reconciliation after Dad's funeral, but Lila had other plans. She had spent days preparing, ensuring that when the time came, there would be no room for Marin to twist the truth. Everyone sat around the table, the tension barely noticeable to those who weren't paying close attention. Marin, dressed in her usual confident style, smiled as if she owned the room. She didn't suspect that tonight would be the night her carefully maintained facade would crumble. Lila took a deep breath and spoke, her voice steady, calm, and precise. "Marin, I think it's time we talked about some things that have been going on for years." Her eyes met her sister's, and there was a firmness there that Marin hadn't seen before. Marin blinked, caught off guard by the sudden seriousness. "What are you talking about?" she asked, a hint of nervousness creeping into her tone. Lila reached into her bag and pulled out the folder containing the financial records. She placed it on the table in front of Marin, opening it to the pages showing the withdrawals and transfers from Dad's accounts. "I've gone through everything," Lila said quietly. "These are the amounts that were taken without authorization. You've been siphoning money from Dad for years, Marin. Do you have an explanation?" A flash of panic crossed Marin's face. She stammered, trying to come up with an excuse, but her usual smooth confidence was gone. "Lila, it wasn't like that. I thought." Her voice trailed off as she realized her lies wouldn't hold. Lila stayed calm, letting the weight of the evidence speak for itself. She didn't raise her voice or yell. She didn't need to. Every relative at the table could see the proof, could see the shock and guilt written clearly on Marin's face. Sterling, seated next to Lila, leaned slightly forward. His presence was quiet but commanding, a reminder that Lila wasn't alone. He didn't speak, but the subtle way he observed Marin added pressure she couldn't ignore. The combination of Lila's composure and Sterling's calm authority made it impossible for Marin to deny what was in front of everyone. Tears welled in Marin's eyes, and she began to babble, desperate to explain herself, but the room was already silent. Even the relatives who had long believed Marin's carefully crafted image could see the truth emerging. Lila's measured approach left no room for argument. The evidence was clear, and Sterling's quiet support ensured that Marin couldn't manipulate the situation. By the end of the evening, Marin sat defeated, her arrogance replaced by panic and shame. Lila had achieved more than exposing her sister. She had taken control of the narrative, shown her strength, and ensured that the betrayal could never be ignored. The confrontation wasn't loud or violent. It was precise, calculated, and completely undeniable. For the first time, Marin realized that underestimating Lila had been her greatest mistake. And Lila, watching her sister struggle to respond, felt a quiet satisfaction. Justice had been served, not with anger or revenge alone, but with calm strategy and undeniable truth. After the confrontation at the family dinner, Lila felt a calm determination settle over her. She knew that exposing Marin at the table was only the first step. To ensure that justice was complete, she needed to take control of the estate and prevent Marin from causing more damage. Lila worked closely with Sterling, who quietly guided her through the legal processes. His experience as a lawyer was invaluable. He explained how to use the evidence of Marin's theft and manipulation to secure Lila's position. Every document was reviewed, every loophole carefully closed, and every potential ally on Marin's side discreetly informed of the truth. Sterling never spoke much in public, but his presence was felt strongly, a silent shield ensuring Marin could not turn anyone against Lila. Marin tried, at first, to rally some of the relatives who had once been loyal to her. She whispered, she flattered, and she tried to twist the story in her favor, but the tide had already turned. Those who had long admired Marin's charm could now see the cracks, the lies, and the selfishness that had been hidden behind her polished smile. Lila's approach was quiet but unstoppable. She didn't humiliate Marin with drama or loud accusations. Instead, she used facts, evidence, and careful strategy. Every step was measured, every move precise. Slowly, the family and friends who had been unsure began to recognize Marin's true nature. They saw the betrayal, the greed, and the manipulation that had defined her behavior for years. The estate, once a battleground of uncertainty, shifted firmly into Lila's hands. Her careful planning and Sterling's guidance ensured that she had the legal authority to manage everything, leaving Marin powerless to interfere. Lila felt no gloating satisfaction, only a quiet sense of justice. She had been wronged, and now the balance had been restored. Watching Marin's attempts to regain influence fail was oddly satisfying. The friends and acquaintances who had admired her before now kept their distance or quietly sided with Lila. Marin's confidence, once so unshakable, crumbled under the weight of her own actions. Lila remained calm, observing as her sister faced the consequences of years of deceit. Sterling stayed close, his quiet support steadying her through every meeting and decision. He never needed to dominate the situation. His knowledge and presence made it clear that Lila was protected and that Marin's schemes could not succeed. Together, they moved through the estate's legal matters efficiently, leaving Marin no room to challenge them. By the end, the estate was firmly in Lila's control, and the truth about Marin's actions had spread through the family and close friends. Justice had been served in a way that felt natural, inevitable, and fair. Marin could no longer manipulate or deceive anyone without being exposed. Lila allowed herself a moment of quiet relief. The years of being overshadowed, underestimated, and betrayed were finally behind her. She had reclaimed her family's trust, restored order to the estate, and ensured that her sister could no longer harm anyone with her greed. The revenge had been executed, not with anger or cruelty, but with patience, intelligence, and unwavering determination. Weeks had passed since the confrontation and the final resolution of Dad's estate. Lila had settled into a new rhythm, one filled with purpose and quiet confidence. The estate was secure under her management, and every decision she made reflected the careful planning and thought she had poured into taking control. Business was thriving, her real estate ventures growing steadily, and she felt stronger than ever before. Marin, in contrast, had become a shadow of her former self. The relatives and friends who had once admired her distanced themselves as the truth about her greed and manipulation spread. Invitations stopped coming, favors ceased, and her attempts to rebuild her reputation were met with polite skepticism or outright refusal. She had always relied on charm and cunning, but now the world saw her clearly for the first time. Humiliation and isolation weighed heavily on her, and Lila observed it with a quiet sense of justice fulfilled, not gloating, but a calm acknowledgement that the balance had been restored. Lila often reflected on the past few weeks, thinking about how much she had learned about patience and strategy. She realized that revenge was never about acting in anger. It was about timing, preparation, and trusting the right people. Sterling had been an unwavering support, his quiet guidance helping her navigate a path that she could have never managed alone. She understood now that strength was not always loud or aggressive. It could be quiet, calculated, and effective. As she walked through the rooms of the house she now fully controlled, Lila felt a sense of ownership, not just over the property or the estate, but over her life. For years, she had been overshadowed by Marin, overlooked by her father, and underestimated by everyone who assumed she was weak. Those days were over. She had proven to herself that she was capable of handling anything, even betrayal from someone she once trusted deeply. Her relationship with Sterling had grown stronger as well. Their partnership had not only been about strategy and legal maneuvering, it had been about trust and understanding. He had seen her strength, and she had learned to lean on him when needed without losing her own sense of agency. Together, they had weathered the storm and emerged stronger, a team bound by respect and shared purpose. Lila also felt a sense of peace. The constant tension that had haunted her during the years of being undermined was gone. She no longer worried about Marin's schemes or about being left powerless. She had reclaimed control and built a foundation for her future that was unshakable. Even in her quiet moments, she could feel the growth that had come from the struggle. Lila Carrington, once the overshadowed and underestimated sister, had become someone who commanded respect without demanding it, someone who had turned betrayal into an opportunity for growth and empowerment. She had learned that true strength lay in patience, careful planning, and trusting the people who truly had her back. And for the first time in years, Lila felt completely in control of her own life. The storm of betrayal had passed, leaving behind a woman who was confident, capable, and ready for whatever came next. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow across the lake. Lila and Sterling sat side by side on the old wooden dock, their feet dangling just above the water. The air was calm, carrying the faint scent of pine and the soft sounds of evening birds. For the first time in weeks, Lila felt a true sense of peace. The battles were over, the estate secured, and the chaos caused by Marin's betrayal was finally behind them. Sterling glanced at her, a gentle smile on his face. "It's quiet," he said, his voice low and steady. "Feels good after everything." Lila nodded, letting her gaze linger on the horizon. "It does. I never thought I'd feel this calm after so much mess," she said. Her hand brushed against his, and she felt the quiet strength in his presence. He had been her partner, her guide, and her anchor through all of it. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, letting the colors of the sunset reflect on the water and fill the emptiness left by the storm. Lila's thoughts drifted to Dad. How proud he might have been to see her take control, to see her finally stand tall. She remembered the small moments from her childhood, the ones that had built the foundation of resilience in her. Those memories were bittersweet, tinged with sadness for what had been lost, but also warmth in knowing she had grown stronger. Suddenly, a timid voice broke the quiet. Marin appeared at the edge of the dock, her face tentative, eyes filled with a mixture of shame and longing. "Lila, can we talk?" she asked, her voice unsteady. Lila turned slowly, meeting her sister's gaze. She could see the regret, the embarrassment, and even a hint of vulnerability that had never been there before. Sterling's hand brushed hers, a silent signal that he was with her, whatever choice she made. Taking a deep breath, Lila spoke calmly but firmly. "Marin, I think you understand now that your actions have consequences. I've always believed in fairness, and that's what you're seeing. Reconciliation doesn't mean ignoring what's been done." Her voice carried the weight of all the patience, planning, and courage that had brought her to this moment. Marin's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. She nodded slowly, but Lila didn't offer an embrace. Strength, Lila realized, wasn't cruelty. It was understanding that actions have consequences and standing firm when necessary. She had learned that lesson the hard way, and she wasn't about to forget it. Turning her attention back to the lake, Lila exhaled slowly, feeling the tension leave her body. Sterling rested his hand over hers, and together they watched as the last rays of sunlight disappeared, leaving a quiet, deepening twilight. The air felt lighter, as if the world itself acknowledged that justice had been served, that betrayal had been met with patience and strength, and that empowerment was born from resilience. Lila knew life would continue to bring challenges, but she also knew she was ready. She had reclaimed her family, her home, and her sense of self. And as the stars began to twinkle above, she felt a deep satisfaction, knowing that every choice she had made had been the right one. Justice had been served, love had been preserved, and the lessons of betrayal had transformed her into someone unshakable, wise, and finally at peace.